Hello everyone, welcome to what will likely be the first of many takes. We're already on take number 2 for the Gamma Stories library page. For those of you who are joining us from my affiliate page over at Instagram, welcome. So essentially my plan for this page is we're going to be talking about, topics primarily related to serious illnesses like cancer, my personal experiences with it, and, mostly just how they relate to current ongoing events at the minute. So today we're going to be talking about how with everything that's going on with coronavirus, it's having a sort of large rolling stone effect on the way that we as a nation are treating other illnesses, particularly those like cancer. So we'll just get into it. So in terms of my background, those of you who don't follow my other pages and are unfamiliar with my personal history, so in around June of last year, I was diagnosed with a Ewing sarcoma on the 8th rib on the right side of my rib cage. So for those of you who don't know, Ewing sarcoma is a rare form of bone cancer that it can lie dormant for a particularly long time. In my case, it took 6 months for an official diagnosis after a couple of misdiagnoses, no idea. I went through 9 months of what's known as VDC, i.e. chemotherapy. For those of you who might know people who are going through something similar, when people refer to letters in terms of what their treatment plan looks like, that usually just refers to what chemicals are involved in treating that individual. So for me, VDC, vincristine, doxorubicin, cyclophosphamide, and then IE is ifosfamide and etoposide. So not very pleasant. 9 months with those, with a rib resection in the middle, in which doctors were commissioned to just hack out part of my rib cage and replace it with a bit of plastic. So, I'm about 6 months in remission now, so I can sort of get around pretty normally, cancer-free for around 6 months. So in the build-up to returning to work, I'm a digital consultant. I work for a firm in London, and I dabble in other things. So, online activism, as it relates to things like long-term illnesses and how they affect young adults, and also a background in publishing as well. So I thought that what we would open with today is talking about how coronavirus has spiraled into affecting the way that we are able to treat cancer as an illness as well. So for those of you living in the UK, this is something that you'll all be very familiar with already. We as a nation, we've been on lockdown since around the 23rd of March. So after a couple of months, since around January, of our government, it started off providing guidelines for how we limit our social interactions and try and minimize the risk of, catching this illness as much as we possibly can, which eventually led to, because it was, being spread so quickly, we had to go into lockdown with the aim of reducing the R, or the basic reproductive number, trying to get it as close to 0 as possible, so that we can, reduce the number of vulnerable people that are being killed by this illness. For those of you who are familiar with the previous coronavirus epidemics we've had in the past, so the SARS and the MERS outbreaks respectively, coronavirus has a lower fatality rate if you're looking at the global statistics, or what we have so far. Hindsight's 2020, so we obviously don't have an entirely clear picture of how many people are going to die globally. However, as it stands at the minute, lower fatality rate but a much higher transmission rate, so far easier for this virus to get into places like care homes, schools, hospitals, cancer wards, anywhere where you've got vulnerable people congregating. There's a much higher risk of it getting into those places and affecting vulnerable individuals. So we reached the point where a quarantine was necessary, which in a way is an experience that a lot of cancer patients will be familiar with. Those who are undergoing their treatment, they'll typically spend a significant portion of their time, so 9 months in my case, enduring a quarantine not too dissimilar from what everyone's had to go through at the minute. So it's almost a second nature for a lot of people at this point. Very frustrating for somebody like me who spent 9 months going through treatment, and then within a couple of months of getting out of the hospital and being able to an extent do my own thing again, and then for everybody to be in the same situation, it is quite frustrating. However, not as frustrating as the experiences that a lot of people still trying to go through treatment at the minute, or people who are still battling their illness are going through at the minute. So if we take a minute to discuss the direct impact of COVID-19, I think in this video I'll be talking about things in terms of the direct and indirect impacts of how this illness has affected a lot of people. So the statistics that we have as of July 11th of this year, so there have been a total of 288,953 confirmed cases according to my notes, with 44,798 confirmed deaths. So in the time it's taken me to do my research and record this video, have it edited and uploaded, that will undoubtedly have gone up. However, if you look at different figures, there are over 55,000 death certificates that make reference to coronavirus. So there is the potential for it to have played a large role in a lot more premature deaths than are officially recognised. So if you take those, when we look at mortality rates, we calculate that by taking the number of confirmed deaths from an illness, dividing it by the number of total confirmed cases, and then multiplying that by 100, and that's how you get the mortality rate calculated for an illness. So in the UK, as it stands at the minute, there's a mortality rate of around 15.5%, which still doesn't quite hit MERS levels, but it's far more deadly than other outbreaks that we've witnessed in the past. So the impacts of diseases like cholera and so forth, and how they might affect populace today. So 90% of the people that have died have either been over the age of 60 or have had underlying health conditions, which accounts for how there's an ongoing trend at the minute of how you can see places like care homes being significantly more vulnerable to being impacted by this disease than other, other populations, if you will. That's because the people living in there are all over a certain age, and with age comes the opportunity for a lot of people to suffer with chronic health conditions. So that's why we see that a lot more people are impacted by that. Although, serious health conditions don't just affect people over 60, that affects a lot of people. So people in my case who, those who've had experiences with cancer in the past. So for me, I was shielding up until recently because my immune system hadn't had the opportunity to return to what we would consider an acceptable level for people to be able to freely mingle with other people in society. For people who are still doing treatment, undoubtedly many of those will still be shielding. I think shielding as a whole might be being brought to an end, or being definitely being restructured to a degree, but there's still that ongoing risk for people who essentially don't have a functioning immune system. So an important thing to consider when we discuss how coronavirus has impacted the way that we're able to treat other people, it's important to look at things like the medications that we're using to try and treat the illness. So in a situation where a lot of people are dying and we don't have a vaccine readily available, or there's not a guaranteed reliable method of treating people, any breakthrough in any area of research is definitely going to lead to a lot of hype around a specific medication or a specific method of treatment. And a prime example of this is a steroid called dexamethasone. For those of you who don't have any experience with people dealing with cancer or people with autoimmune illnesses, dexamethasone is a steroid that's used in a lot of treatment plans for people who are going through long-term illnesses and have problems with their immune system. So I used it quite regularly throughout my treatment. So each time I would go in for chemotherapy, which was once every 2 weeks, so I would go in for one VDC cycle, have 2 weeks off, and deal with the side effects that come with that, which is something I'll undoubtedly talk about in a future video. And then after the 2 weeks, I'd return back in for the IE cycle, which is more frustrating because that's a 5-day stint where you're staying at the hospital. But I'd frequently be prescribed dexamethasone as something to, protect me and keep me going. I couldn't break down exactly what every single medication does because there are so many and they all have their quirks, but it was found in a study recently that dexamethasone can be used to help those who suffer from more serious side effects of coronavirus. So it was revealed that for those who required mechanical ventilation, we can reduce the fatalities by up to a third. And for people who were receiving supplemental oxygen, we can reduce it by up to a fifth. Which, when you look at the global impact and the number of people who are dying right now, that's an opportunity to really, going forward, mitigate, as many future deaths as possible. I don't think we'll ever get to a point where we can completely wipe out the effect that the coronavirus has unless a vaccine is found. But even then, there's always, with things like healthcare inequality in some parts of the world, I doubt we'd ever be able to fully eradicate it, which is a shame. But in the meantime, we have to put our faith in, the treatments as they become available. So with that discovery, as you would expect in a free market system, when, we discover that a product is reliable, it does what it needs to do, and it's effective at doing it, the demand for it is going to skyrocket. So in the American market, the demand for dexamethasone reached nearly 610% of what it is normally, so before the coronavirus outbreak. But of course, companies aren't typically used to working at 610% of the capacity that they're used to. So with that comes the difficulty of it being harder to fill prescriptions for people that are already taking it or for people who are now suffering for coronavirus and need it. So it's thought that, I think this might be in the UK market, this statistic, but I'm not 100% sure. But in terms of the number of prescriptions that were filled on time, this went from around 97% to 54% in the immediate aftermath of the demand skyrocketing. And again, when a drug becomes more popular and the demand increases, especially when you look at industries where there are several companies that have quite a monopoly on, the distribution of different medications, the price also skyrockets as well. And I'm a believer that, heavily in the free market system, that competition is something that's very healthy for ensuring that a lot of people receive, the best quality product they can for the fairest price. However, in this case, this has meant that a lot of people are struggling to access the medication that they need. And for some people, this can be a life or death situation that they're faced with. So if you look at coronavirus patients, you could have somebody on a ventilation system who doesn't get their dexamethasone that passes away, or you can disrupt a cancer patient's treatment to the extent where their life expectancy is lessened as well, which is unfortunate, especially with further studies revealing that this medication isn't actually effective in treating people with more milder symptoms. So as a steroid, dexamethasone sort of suppresses the immune system, if you will. So that means that if you're suffering from the more milder symptoms, you need to have your immune system, effective as it can be to fight it. So by switching it off, essentially, you can put people who are in a more manageable position into a far more dangerous one. And the evidence showed that there was an increase from around 13% to near 17% in fatalities for people who were treated with dexamethasone, but didn't require mechanical ventilation or supplementary oxygen. So dexamethasone acts largely as a microcosm, in a way, to represent the larger way in which coronavirus puts strain on, our pharmaceutical capabilities and, what access patients or suffering from all manner of illnesses have when it comes to getting their medications on time. But this isn't just limited to the tablets that people need to take in order to sustain themselves. This extends to all of the services that the NHS provides. So if you've got an epidemic like we have now, sort of pandemic now, where we've got thousands of people occupying beds that wouldn't normally be occupied at this at present, because there's not usually a pandemic going on, that leaves far fewer resources, beds, staff on hand to help manage people that would usually be receiving care at this time. So that's put a hold on many cancer surgeries. So if there aren't enough beds, we can't get people in for their surgeries on time. if we can't get the medication that they need, if there's pharmaceutical delays, that could extend even to the point of potentially reducing people's access to chemotherapy. So as somebody who's not prevalent, but I interact with a lot of people in the online cancer community, so we're seeing at the minute, thankfully we're at a point now where it's starting to reduce. However, I don't see enough publicity being given to the issues that a lot of cancer patients and other sufferers of other illnesses have gone through in the wake of there being more strain on the NHS, which is no fault of people in the NHS. It's an unfortunate situation, but I just think we need to give recognition to people whose survival chances are being impacted by the current situation. And it's something that you won't often see spoken about, which is why I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about it. So so even down to things like social distancing, that can have its own problems. So, people can't congregate in large spaces. Many patients that go for chemotherapy regularly are used to interacting with not other patients in crowds, but, we aren't kept apart from each other. We usually travel with family members who are able to keep us company. If you're familiar with places like the Hub, which is a facility in London near University College of London Hospital, which is used to provide in-care, it's inpatient care for cancer patients, but on a daycare basis. The Hub's quite an interesting place, actually, so it'd be good to take a minute to speak about that. So rather than having people go and stay on a ward, so there is a cancer ward on T12 over in UCLH. However, the Hub is used sort of as an alternative where people stay in nearby hotels, which are funded by the NHS, and people are able to go in through their treatment during the day, and then they're able to leave and roam to a limited degree with their family, who, we usually allow one person to stay with us while we're at the hospital. So even small things like that. So with the increased safety measures, a lot of people will either have to travel to their appointments unaccompanied, which for people travelling long distances isn't really feasible. And it's not safe for a lot of people to travel, particularly if you're shielding. This extends to even maintenance for people who are in remission. So I don't travel to see my doctor personally at the minute. I have scans and other investigations done locally to ensure that I'm still in a healthy state. And then that's sent to my doctor at the Hub, which is unprecedented because the doctors at these hospitals like to have a very close relationship with the patients that they care for. So even small things like that, if you have people that aren't seeing their doctors as regularly and the investigations into their health aren't being done on a personal basis, the risk of things like relapse isn't monitored as closely as people would like, and that increases risk for people who are at risk of having their cancer return. So if we look at the figures that are given by a lot of, some of the articles that have been released relating to the impact on cancer, how coronavirus has affected the healthcare industry. So when we look at delays to not just people's care, so I speak to people online and I see images of people who've had ports and PICC lines, which for those of you who don't know, they're tools that are used to administer chemotherapy to patients on a sort of long-term basis. So I have, my scar from my PICC line, which was implanted roughly a week after I was diagnosed and stayed in there to the day I finished my chemotherapy. So there are people having theirs, well, perhaps not at the minute, but surely when this all kicked off, a lot of people having theirs removed for simply because they wouldn't be able to receive treatment for a while. And having treatment delayed in any respect, even down to things like surgery, you want to get, you want to use chemotherapy to, sort of control and reduce the presence of cancer in the body as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And then you want surgery as soon as possible to remove that from the body and, increase survival risk as much as possible. So if you look at people not being able to receive their treatment, that's going to increase the number of fatalities. So, people's survival chances after they finish their treatment are reduced. But not only that, with everything that's going on, a lot of people aren't visiting their GPs, and a lot of GPs don't have the full capacity to work with patients as much as they would like. that means that we've got, cancer isn't offering a reprieve just because other people are dying of coronavirus. So that's a lot of people that aren't being diagnosed when they need to, so they can get on with the treatment that's going to keep them alive. So the few articles that have discussed this estimate that anywhere within the region of 92,000 lives will end prematurely, directly of cancer, but indirectly because of the delays that have been caused by coronavirus. And the NHS works tirelessly. I don't think anybody who, like myself, who is in the system receiving regular treatment to battle cancer, I don't think anybody would fault the people who work in the NHS, because it's clearly not a problem of that they've created. But it's important to keep in mind that we see the deaths caused by coronavirus a lot more head on. We get the numbers fed to us daily, but 92,000 people that will die prematurely because of cancer, that's a lot of people. That's coming up to, that's not directly, but that's around like 40% of the people that have already died of coronavirus. And that's just talking about one illness. There are plenty of other ones. So the impact of this pandemic spreads far wider than a lot of people might immediately consider, which gives a lot more credibility to the guidance we're being given at the minute. So, wear your masks, socially distance, don't go out on the lash. I know the pubs are open, but, don't get into bar fights or anything along those lines. So yeah, it's something interesting to think about, the wider impact of these illnesses, and the impact that it has on things like mental health as well. So an article released in May of this year, so quite early in the stages of the pandemic, but still within the boundary of quarantine, said that mental health charities like the Samaritans were receiving 7,000 calls a day, with a third of those, so around 2,300, being directly related to the ongoing coronavirus situation. And the pandemic that is, less so now, but at the time was keeping a lot of people indoors, with, a lot of people really not sure about the future, the personal one and the future of society at large. So, over a third of the calls that these mental health charities were receiving were directly linked to the situation. So with a lot of industries suffering from, being closed for long periods of time or having to operate at a reduced capacity, and then we look at the numbers of, furloughed positions, it's thought that around 9.4 million positions in the UK have been furloughed within the last few months. We're going to see a lot more people unemployed. So already between March and June, the number of people in the UK claiming unemployment benefits has risen to 2.6 million, which I think translates to an unemployment rate of around 4%, according to my research. That's a lot of people that were previously in work and functioning to a pretty successful and independent degree that now are in, looking at potential financial jeopardy. A lot of people, almost at a loss, really. People are quite comfortable in their positions at work, and then all of a sudden they're out of work and they have families to support, or, they might lose drive for the direction that their career is going. And that's going to have a very obvious impact, that's going to translate very directly to a lot more people suffering from mental health, which we're already seeing in the increased number of calls to mental health charities. And unfortunately, that means that there is a much higher risk of people committing suicide. So in my research at the minute, so the highest demographic affected by suicide are males aged 49 to 50 from low socioeconomic backgrounds. So based on what I've learned, a lot of the work positions being affected at the minute, so areas like retail, manual labour positions, other areas like that, that means that we're seeing a lot of people in this demographic and outside of those demographics as well, because it affects everybody. That's a lot of people that are going to be out of work and are going to struggle to find work even when this all calms down. So we're going to not only see a lot of, not just important in terms of, people contributing to the industries that they were a part of, but people, people as individuals, that we're going to lose, and families that are going to be devastated as well, because, it's terrible to lose somebody to coronavirus. It's a very unpleasant experience, but you know, it's equally harrowing to think that, you know, through our efforts to try and keep other people safe, that has the indirect impact of, you know, destroying some people's mental health and indirectly killing them. So, you know, we can only hope and pray that, you know, the more we carry on, and especially with certain restrictions being lifted at the minute, I know the government's implemented people having to wear masks and do other things that, even though we can, you know, function within society a little bit more and we can go and operate more as we normally would, that we take all the steps we can to keep ourselves safe, so that, you know, the more responsible we are, the quicker everything opens up and the more we can go to normal as well. But not just in terms of how our personal lives work, but we want, you know, independent, you know, we want businesses to recover as quickly as possible. We want people to keep their shops open so that people are still working and people still have purpose, and people's mental health isn't, you know, destroyed by, you know, a lack of purpose, which, particularly when you look at the demographic of, you know, men aged 45 to 49, it's considered that one of the most important, you know, one of the most intrinsic things to their mental health is, you know, having an individual purpose. So, you know, we all have a responsibility as citizens to try and keep each other safe and ensure that, you know, our country returns to full working order almost, you know, operating at the best efficiency we can as soon as possible. So yeah, those are largely my thoughts on the topic. Really unfamiliar with the way you know, video sharing platforms work. I've never edited a video before in my life, so we'll see how this comes out. I'm going to try my best. I'll get an Audacity trial. I'll try and find some not so terrible royalty-free music, and hopefully this will be up soon. And yeah, feel free to leave whatever comments, or, you know, if it's completely awful, tell me to bugger off and I won't come back, or if you've got some ideas for how I could improve the content, and if you would like a more refined series talking about, you know, serious illnesses and relating them to other, you know, areas of society, then yeah, that would be great as well. It's just a good way to pass the time by spreading awareness through whatever channels I can. Yes, so thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Hopefully it isn't a near half hour of complete waffle. So yeah, thank you for taking the time to watch this video. For those of you who are interested more in my work and are, you know, interested in supporting me, I am published. I do have a history of making online content that isn't complete crap, so I will put a link in some place. I don't even know if Library has links. I'm still investigating how the platform works, so you know, that shameless self-promotion could be completely for nothing. But The Circle is basically a diary of my experiences as a young adult dealing with cancer, and it's used to sort of spread awareness for people who may not be familiar with how it affects people, and it's just a self-reflection on the way that it, as you know, it's affected me personally and how I've had to grow up and develop from it. So yeah, hopefully see you guys soon. Thank you.